Good day, fellow champions of inclusion. I'm Aaron, and this is the Inclusive Dad podcast, where we explore inclusion and make it practical. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join me in exploring ways we can create a more inclusive world together. You are important, you matter, and you can make a difference. Today, my guest is Sean Adelman. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Why don't you just start us off by just telling us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thank you for having me on the show. My name is Sean Adelman. I'm an orthopedic trauma surgeon, but more importantly, I'm a dad. I have three wonderful adult children. My middle daughter, Devin, has Down syndrome, and she's inspired me to look at my life and how I do things in a very different way. My perspective has shifted, and we can talk about that a lot. But I always introduce myself as a dad first and a surgeon second because I've learned what's important in life and how we touch other people. Individually makes a difference, even with my work environment being, the way it is.
Yeah, thank you.
I've been fortunate enough to write a few books and have some adventures along the way. So I'm very excited to be able to talk with you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Let's start off. What is your definition of inclusion?
Oh, that's, as you know, that's always a loaded question. People often ask me, well, what's the difference between acceptance and inclusion? I always sort of draw back to, if you've ever been to a Special Olympics event, after every race or track meet or whatever, there's always a big dance. And it's this crazy, wonderful energy. And so I always reference things like that because, inclusion is, having somebody at the dance that you dance with. Acceptance is having somebody in the room. So you can invite somebody to the room and they're there with you, but that doesn't mean they're included. And that's the same way for sports and for work. So my definition of inclusion is just being part of the gang, having somebody that you actually pass the ball to, even if you know they're going to miss, versus, stopping the game so that everybody can sort of be inspired by their presence on the court. And I think people who haven't experienced that don't really understand it. And I always preface this by, I'm a dad. My job is not to sort of speak for my daughter. My job is to tell people my perception and my perspective and how it's changed my life. And so inclusion from a dad's perspective is watching my daughter play on a team with other people who pass the ball back and forth versus, her just being a bystander clapping in the stadiums.
I love that. For me, like growing up, I don't remember, hearing the word disability, being around anybody with a disability. How was it for you? Did you know anybody with a disability growing up?
Oh my gosh, that one cuts right at the heart of it. I talk to people a lot about this because, growing up, I was a military brat, so I lived all over. And a lot of my school was in West Texas. And I didn't know anybody with an intellectual developmental disability growing up. Like it was not a thing. And statistically, that's impossible. Like there's no way that those people were not around when I was in my, high school, elementary school, middle school. Like never, ever did I meet anybody, which is just insane. And which is crazy because when I was in high school, like I was in a part of the town where I was literally the only Caucasian person on the basketball team, yet I knew nobody with a disability. And it really wasn't until I had a daughter with intellectual disability that that world was thrust upon me. And as a physician in that setting, I was, you'd think I'd be more prepared for that, but honestly, it was worse because, all I knew were the negative things about what could happen. And at that point in time, the average life expectancy for somebody with trisomy 21 was in their 30s. And the expectation was that they would be going to, a home and the reality is very different. So that social emotional part of being a parent is not something that people talk about, and especially when you have these preconceived notions about what it means and what your expectations are, which is our whole thing. You talk about inclusion. Inclusion is expectations. If you expect your kids to be part of the gang, they'll be much more likely part of the gang. And it's been shown research wise, this isn't just me sort of saying my little piece of it. is how you expect people to achieve. And that's just not just with your children, but your family, your friends, everybody around you. Your expectation actually affects them. I expect that this show is going to be great and is going to tell a message. And so, because of those expectations I have of you, the chances of this show being better are greater. That just is what it is. And we have to remember those things when we're talking about parents and children, and particularly somebody in the healthcare field. I don't know squat, as you and I can both attest, we're at that stage of life when you don't know what you don't know. And the older you get, the more you realize how little you do know. And when you have a child with a disability, that is like fast forward. Like the things that you don't know are so magnified that you cannot ignore it. As somebody in their early 20s and 30s, you can be in denial all you want. But when you're thrust in the world of disability and that sort of stuff, it's fast forward.
Yeah, so it sounds like we have little bit similar stuff. I mean, I went to private Christian school through 8th grade, so I mean, it doesn't surprise me. There wasn't anybody there probably, but yeah, in high school looking back, it's like I don't remember. It's like where were they? They must have been there, but yeah, I just it's probably one of those things like you're not aware of it, so you don't remember it probably. I'm thinking, but yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I've talked to other, parents of children with disabilities who are like teachers, so they're in that education system and like their perspective being like a parent in that system. I don't think I've ever talked to anybody like who's in like the healthcare field and like how it was for you as a parent. I mean, do you want to maybe talk a little bit about since you were like in the health field, like I mean, were you treated? I mean, maybe talk about like were you treated differently or poorly, worse, or I mean, like your experience, kind of being an insider, like in,
Yeah,
having a
yeah.
child diagnosed with something.
No, I think you're hitting on the head. And in the healthcare field, um, I know you've probably sensed this with some interactions. The first response, oh, you've got a beautiful daughter, and oh, she has Down syndrome. Oh, I'm so sorry. Like that is the first response of almost everybody who's in the healthcare field. I'm so sorry. Like, why? Of my three children, she lives in her own apartment. She's got a job. She's got a fiance. And like she is set. She's amazing. But in the healthcare field, everybody has this preconceived notion about all the bad things, and their sample size of people with disability is seeing them at their worst, and so their perception of that is magnified. And it's also like, I'm this high achieving surgeon. Don't you want your kids to run Fortune 500 companies and do this? And the answer is no, I want my kids to be good people and I want them to be happy. And that's, something a lot of people don't get. I'm the first physician, first person with a professional degree in my family. So it's not like I have and I don't mean that in any negative way. Just I don't have expectations of what my kids are going to become based on this family legacy. And so for me, it just wasn't that. But being in healthcare, it's really those negative connotations of the medical universe that people see. In orthopedics, we see, young people with Down syndrome who have complications related to some of the things that we see associated with trisomy 21. And that's what I always tell people is trisomy 21 is called Down syndrome. It's a syndrome because there are things that we see associated with that diagnosis, but that's not communicative of who those people actually are. It's a spectrum. And yes, they may have certain similarities in terms of how they look and certain medical complications, but you could say that of amongst several populations. People who are Caucasian have certain things. Ashkenazi Jews have certain familial things that are associated, but you don't think of them in a negative light just because of that. And that's where we tend to sort of focus things in the medical field. So the biggest challenge for me was just the reframing of my perspective because the dogma of medicine sort of created this negative impact of these diagnoses, because those are the things you treat, but those aren't the things you support. And at the end of the day, wellness is a product of our expectations. And if all we do is say, your kid is going to be this in a negative way, then that's going to frame everything. And I can tell you, the time Devin was born, there was 2 families, my family, and this was obviously a surprise. We didn't know this. And Devin, frankly, was in the neonatal intensive care unit for 2 weeks. It was kind of a scary time for us, especially, as you know, uh, I knew a little too much, enough to make me stupid and scared more than anything else. And then but there was another family who, had a child almost the same time. There was a medical family. The dad was a pediatrician, a kidney doctor, and it was very interesting for our family to see how their family handled things. Fortunately, my wife is like she's just amazing human, and we just embraced the whole thing and said we don't know Jack. We're gonna move on, and we're gonna include her in everything, no matter what everybody says. That's the straightforward thing. And this other family, they were lovely people, but they just never coped. He could not cope with having a child that was not going to be able to achieve what he thought he achieved in life. And as soon as they could, they had another kid. And it was like it was almost like a mistake that they had to. It was like a do over instead of an embracing thing. And I don't want to say negative things about him because that's not what this is about. But that was because their thoughts and expectations were biased in a way that wasn't real. And one of the things I have the advantage of is I see people at their worst. Like my job, I see people at the end of their life, and so I have perspective on both ends of the spectrum. And I know for a fact that whether your child, friend, whoever has a diagnosis or not, that is not a guarantee of anything. To start the world with a diagnosis and a preconceived notion based on that diagnosis, and bias yourself for that, whether it's your life or not, is really naive. And part of my, I don't want to say mission, but part of my thought process is making sure people understand that life is variable, no matter what you believe or think, and you have to embrace what you have and make the best of it, instead of sort of trying to choose what you have no power over choosing. Because if you think you do, you just don't.
Yeah, for me, it's some of the stuff you're talking about. Like, I've had situations, I mean, take my daughter out to the mall or something. People are like, "Oh, it's so nice you take her, you bring her to the mall." I'm like, you bring my son to the mall. Like, why is it? I mean, I'm just treating her like, my daughter, like I would treat other kids. And it's interesting how people you view that, or, different things like that. It's been interesting. Like, just, yeah, why would I not take her out of the house and go to the fair or the mall or any different places? So just, yeah, people's expectations and things like that. The other thing you want to talk about for me, it was, I'm not sure where this comes from, but I had this view, like, people such as yourself, like doctors or teachers or, those types of professions, like, call it like I thought they were God and I couldn't question them. So my daughter, she had her, she has epilepsy. She's diagnosed with epilepsy and cerebral palsy, so she's having seizures. And when she was young, multiple grand mal seizures, two that lasted over 90 minutes, and several where she's been airlifted. And there was a time where she got some medication in the ER, and the doctor did it this way, and the next time she comes in, they give her the same stuff, and they give it to her like differently. Like, the first time is like, we have to do this slow over 5 minutes or it's going to burn her veins, and next time it's like they just got the syringe and I was like, hold on. I'm like, what just happened? They're like, what? I'm like, last time they said this time you did this. Which one is it? That moment I realized that I'm like, okay, doctors are humans. They're coming up with a solution based on the facts and, their best judgment. Once that happened, I would start to, like, if stuff like that came up, I would question it. And, it was eye-opening for me where, having that, like, they're just humans. They're making the best decision. And how do as a parent, like, if I see something that I don't agree with or question, I have the right to ask. And that was, eye-opening for me. So I don't know. Have you had experiences like that where, something.
Absolutely. And first off, I applaud you. It's not just your ability, it's your responsibility to advocate for those that you love. And when I see people in the hospital, I encourage them to advocate. People question me. I applaud that because, I learn from my patients. I'm a human. I make mistakes and I have to explain my decisions and my thought processes. And I always go through it like that because it's important. You have to advocate. And sometimes it's based on misinformation, and sometimes it's based on real information. And that's just the reality of the world we live in. But any physician who questions somebody advocating for themselves or a loved one doesn't deserve the job. We don't have to agree, but I have to explain myself. If is there a reason you're doing this more quickly than the person did? You can explain yourself. Maybe there's a new article, maybe there's a new, but you need to be able to explain yourself. And your job is not to be a bystander. Your job is to advocate. A lot. It's interesting because my family life is early intervention, and my work life is end of life issues and advocating for loved ones in really challenging situations. And I always try to empower families to do so. And I've been on the other end of that, both in schools. We moved. Ann Arbor was it's interesting, and you've probably had some experience with this moving around. Different states have different emphasis. In Ann Arbor, the emphasis was inclusion and education. So Devin, even though we had to fight a little bit, she was completely included in all of her classrooms. And I was her youth coach, so I got to include her in all the youth sports and with my other children. That was a wonderful time. And moving to Seattle, which is wonderful in its own right, we assumed it was going to be very progressive, but it's not. The school systems were not progressive, and we really had to put our foot down about inclusion and getting her in to class where she was able to grow with other students to the point where it was ugly. It worked out, and to be frank, the school systems are a different space now because of the fights that we had, decades ago. Um, but interestingly, the workspace in Seattle is very different. King County, which is where Seattle County is known for the one of the best support employment programs in the country. Which is just a dichotomy. Like, schools suck, but employment's great, and meeting those two are very challenging. So we've had to advocate for her both on the health side, and on the educational side, um, just as you've mentioned.
So when you were like in medical school, was there, I mean, do they do any classes or talk about like, how do you treat people with disabilities or like things you should think about or any of that, any kind of that stuff in your schooling?
That's a wonderful question. The answer is not really. Like, that's been one of my missions early on in my career is, you have to treat everybody. If you make things accessible to everybody, they will be accessible for everybody, regardless of where you are in the spectrum of life. If you just cater to the middle ground, then you're missing people on both sides. Same way for education. And to your point is no. We're taught about diagnoses, we're taught about interactions, how you communicate with people, how you interact with people, but really dealing with people in these specialized circumstances, no. Now, I will tell you, I think things are better because Devin is part of some programs here at University of Washington where they have people that are fostered through the Special Olympics come in to those clinical orientations where young, God, super young in my, in my perspective now, med students are learning how to interview and examine patients, and part of that is bringing people with differences in not just how they look and gender, but like different abilities, so they can learn to interact. Because Devin's adult, she knows what's going on. People assume she's a 2-year-old because she has Down syndrome, but when you're in a doctor's office, they need to be talking to her. I'm just here to help questions she doesn't know. I'm not here to do her thing. And those are lessons that I think we're starting to move forward on. But, when I was a med student, to your point, no, I didn't learn jack about that.
You say like in the doctor's office talking to your daughter, not you, that, I mean, we've had that still where you show up to a doctor appointment and my daughter's in a wheelchair. I mean, I don't even keep like percentages, but I mean, that still happens where they'll look at me and, what's her name and birthday. And I'm like, Cece, like, tell them your name and birthday. It's like, you should ask her first. If she can't answer you or you don't understand, then I'll help her. But like, you shouldn't look to me just because she's in a wheelchair. I don't know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And part of how we've done that with Devin, and we're kind of in this weird phase because she's an adult now.
Yep.
And a lot of, most of specialized medicine for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities happens in the pediatric population. And once you age out of that, there are much fewer adult clinics for people with differences. And you don't want your 30-year-old going back to children's for their doctor's appointment. And so a lot of what we do is really trying to educate people on, she knows what's going on. You have to, interact with her, so we've taken upon ourselves to sort of try to educate the clinicians that she interacts with in a positive way, so that they can pass it on in a more productive way as well. And there's a lot of work with shared decision making, how you engage patients, and all that other stuff. But this is just part of it as well. And I can only imagine how frustrated she would be as well. Devin sort of, that's one thing I've learned is she takes things in stride way better than I do. I mean, she gets upset. She's not always happy. But man, life lessons from her are just, as I've said several times, perspective.
Yeah, for sure. Mhm. Why did you decide to become an author?
Oh, you've got great questions. It's as a young scientist and physician, and I wrote a lot of research stuff. And so the question is, why did I decide to start writing children's books and that kind of stuff? And the reality is, when Devin was small, there was a lot of textbook information, as we kind of alluded to, less about real world engagement. And I wanted to tell her story. I thought people needed to know Devin calls herself the ambassador of possibilities, and people need to know what your child may be able to do, and you need to be able to see yourself in literature and media and all that stuff. And so the shtick of it was I got so frustrated with how people were expecting her to become and behave and all those other things that I wanted to tell her story in a way that was palatable. So the idea was, at least to start with, it was a sort of a Nancy Drew mystery where these fictional settings, but all the things that the character did, the protagonist with Down syndrome, were things that Devin really did in real life. So that you could the idea was that people could visualize themselves in these roles, in these settings, and know that these are possibilities. So, it was really a chapter book where families could read to their kids. We used to go into the classrooms and read to classrooms to really sort of give that perspective to the people around them of what capabilities were. And now I think as a culture, we're understanding that more, the importance of that. But that was my impetus. And as you can, I'm sure with what you're doing, that fear of acceptance and why does a surgeon think he can write children's books? And the first draft I had, I was just petrified. But now it's just become part of me. I've appreciated that this, type A, like get everything done person, really has to have a creative part of my brain working to be a whole human. And that's why, what started off as a scary, like dad moment, people need to know this is, these are the stories. You need to know this stuff. And I want to tell you in a way that you can understand, has become something that I actually need for myself. Like I need to create for myself. And these are the stories that I tell and I create, so that I can exercise that part of my brain to be a full human, frankly.
How many books have you written?
I have 5 at this point. I have 3 fully written, and then I've got like a dozen half written stuff. I've got the 3 chapter books that I started with, the Sam's Top Secret Journal. I've written a couple science fiction books, and one that I'm going to redo called Trispero, which is sort of a medical thriller about the genetics of trisomy 21. My favorite project, honestly, was Eximius, the graphic novel that I did. I was very fortunate. I got to work with a Italian artist. It took me a year to find this person, and it took us 3 years to do it. It was so much fun just seeing my words kind of come to life in these stories. And, before the pandemic, we went to a couple Comic Cons and just seeing parents, with their kids, seeing themselves in this like science fiction superhero role, was just fantastic. So, I'm hoping to relive some of those things and get creative again, but that was those were really fun, and I have to admit, it was fun for me. I know there's a greater good, and then we can talk about that, but I just had a blast. It was so fun. I'm definitely a nerd. I have a Star Trek shirt underneath this, so yeah, Star
There you
Trek.
go.
Yeah, I
Hmm.
yeah, I still remember going to Star Wars the first time with my, in
Okay.
El Paso, Texas. Yeah, I get to claim that. Maybe not there's levels of everything, but, you gotta embrace that part of your life for sure.
Do you play Magic the Gathering?
No, I haven't.
Okay.
Clearly need to, 'cause my oldest daughter as I said, that's the one thing about having adult children, they keep me in the right decade.
There you
So,
go.
absolutely.
Yeah, I hadn't played growing up, but I worked at a residential treatment facility for kids like age 5 through 18 for a few years, and I worked on the older male dorm, so all those kids were playing Magic the Gathering, so some of us started playing Magic the Gathering. So I still play a little bit, not as much as I used to, but it's you can get very deep into it, spending a lot of money pretty quickly. So
Yes.
get you got to watch it, but it's fun. I mean,
It's it
it was a great way to like learn something, connect with the kids, and have that common reference point where they'd want to help build the relationship. So it was a lot of
Oh,
fun.
just engaging, and that's, the wonderful thing about how, because my youngest is a, mechanical engineer, and he grew up playing video games, and engaging with him with video games and music, and it just, it just kept me in touch with the world. My oldest is, Dungeons and Dragons and, sci-fi, and she listens to metal music, and so all my kids kind of bring something else to the faith that helps me engage. And when I'm at work, it's fantastic because I'm in the OR with young people, and we get to talk about anime. What I'm watching, and I'm watching it because my son introduced me to Full Metal Alchemist or whatever that happens to be, and it makes me feel more like a real person.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Do you want to talk about raised expectations or what that is and what the goal is of that?
Yeah, so we were really lucky because when we were thinking about what we wanted to do, raised expectations was available because that really embodies what it is. People will achieve what you allow them to. We talk about the dignity of failure. You have to be given the opportunity to fail before you can succeed. And that's all about that's what raised expectations is all about. It literally is, if you expect more of people, they're more likely to achieve than if you don't expect them. Our whole mantra is raise the bar. We want to raise the bar, but provide a soft landing so that you can jump as many times as you want and know that we're going to catch you and it's going to be okay, so that you don't have to give up. If you don't raise the bar, then you never know what you're capable of doing. So raise expectations is just that, is we want to raise expectations for, and not just for our children with intellectual development needs, all of our kids, all of our friends, all of our, that's, it's a mantra we say time and time, and it seems so obvious, but it's real, and humans tend to be tribal. We tend to sort of look at things in a certain way and expect certain things of certain people. And if we're going to be happy and successful, we have to sort of break that mantra into something that's more productive. And every society has their own way of saying that. But for us personally, our entire sort of being, in terms of what we want to call our movement, is raising expectations, and providing those things. And there have been a lot of examples throughout history, but that's really what it is. The dignity of failure, we say that a lot, because if you're not given a chance, you will not succeed. You got to miss 100,000 free throws before you make one. But you have to be throwing the ball, right? That's inclusion. We have to throw you the ball so that you can fail. Otherwise, you'll never achieve. And on any level, socially, emotionally, or physically, or mentally. So our mantra is raising expectations, and we it seems very simple, but it really is the heart of it, and it makes it easier when I talk to people because the mantra is somewhat self-explanatory, but people don't really get that, and fortunately, speaking with people like you get what I mean when I talk about inclusion. It is a different mindset. People think they understand, but they don't really, and I'm sure your family's had these conversations about, please forgive this word because it sounds terrible, inspiration porn, where people are accepted. I'm inspired by your being, it's just like your dog, oh, they're in the mall. Yay for them. And so that's why Devin says she's an ambassador to possibilities. She wants people to aspire to something. She doesn't want to inspire people because she exists. Those are not the same thing. And so that's kind of what we're about. So, and I've rambled a little bit, so please forgive me.
It's all good. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. What about so for me, my son was born and then 15 months later my daughter was born and just she was born and just all the stuff going on, and at some point I realized early on it's like I was working a ton and I was like, man, it just doesn't seem like this is what life's about. So I kind of, wanted to spend more because she was having, like I said, pretty bad seizures, and I'm like, I mean, I don't want to be working and if she has a bad seizure and I'm not around or something if it's a really bad one. So I just kind of made a decision like, work's not the most important thing and I need to reprioritize. I mean, how was it your life? Did your perspective change after she was born? Or I mean, what things kind of you had to question or
Oh
figure
gosh.
out your priorities?
You just once again, you just hit it on the head, and I alluded a little bit earlier to having priorities when you're young, and being the first physician for surgeon, being the surgeon general, research, running the hospital, big impacts, and when you have a child with special needs, you appreciate that those moments are just as important. How I impact people on a daily basis is just as important. My ability to sort of affect somebody's day grows over time. And so I went from this big focus of being this big person to, focus more on my family. Um, I feel I'm successful because my kids are good people. And I will tell you, a few weeks ago, I went to a concert with my kids. They just them and me. We went to a dinner, went to a bar, had drinks, went to a concert, and had a great time. My adult kids want to hang out with me. To me, that's success, and that's not something I would have thought was success, before I had children. And so now, I'm not focused on what CEO I'm going to become. Now I'm focused on every interaction I have throughout the day. I want to be positive, and if I can, I appreciate the world isn't that simple, because I want everybody who leaves interact with me to be in a better place than they were beforehand. That's my goal for the day. Is everybody I meet is going to have some positive interaction with me that's going to be meaningful. And over time, I think that's going to have a bigger impact than what I could have done otherwise. And I know that's a silly thing maybe to say, but it's true. I fully appreciate that what I say in every moment matters. Having a daughter like Devin, um, it's sort of what would my kids think? How would I behave in this situation? Because she's certainly not an angel. She's got her moments just like all of us, but it does sort of give me perspective on the kind of person that I want to be. Means something different to me now than it did a long time ago. Success means something different. I'm no less successful because I'm not, the top faculty at some big hospital. I'm just differently successful, and hopefully happier. I spent a lot of time with my young partners trying to convince them to go home, to take less call, to be present, do this work later. Your kids are young, they need you now. Your kids will grow, you'll have most of your life is going to be with adult kids who don't need that time. You need to focus and be present now, because your kids are the future of all of us, and you want your kids to be good people. You want the world to be a better place, and you want to be part of that. So your mission is to make the world a better place. Otherwise, having kids is another step. And so a lot of my mantra is not just for myself, but making sure my young partners, when I was, my previous job, I covered paternity and maternity leave for all my young partners, because I wanted them to be able to take that time to spend with their young families. I think that's important. And not just for myself, but for them. Anyway, hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, for sure. How about how have you found support being like a father of a child with a disability? For me, I go to meetings, go to different, seminars, and it's pretty much all women in the room, not a lot of men. I mean, have you been able to find like other dads to talk about? I mean, both talk about your experiences or stuff with?
That's a really great question. There are a few. To your point, is it's much more women, and what's interesting. I've gotten to the point in my life when I'm okay with that. Like when we go to a party, I'm usually in the kitchen talking to the women, more so than talking with the guys, and that just is how my world has evolved. I've got, 2 adult daughters and a wonderful wife, and we talk all the time, and I've gotten to the the point in my masculinity that I am more than happy just to hang out with the girls in the kitchen. Um, my wife is my wife. My life is very binary in the sense that I'm using fancy nerd words, in that when I'm at work, like it's all encompassing, so I don't have a lot of bandwidth to do other stuff. When I'm home, I'm focused entirely on my family. And so part of my not hanging out with other men in these situations is a function of just my life more so than people aren't engaged. But to your point is when we are at those dinners with Special Olympics and Best Buddies and those things. Certainly, the women in the room certainly dominate things. I will say though, the last few years that's changed. The men and the family for the dance center community and Special Olympics have definitely become more pervasive and historically, and you can speak to this, is the men have been the power behind the getting on this board and making these decisions, and the women are the ones sort of having the discussions and that sort of stuff. And I think that dichotomy's changed because it has to, if we're going to be functional humans, because I've got a young, well, he's an adult now, 23-year-old son, and I want to be an example for him and how I interact with others. And if I'm not willing to do that and have these really positive male relationships, uh, we're all going to fail. Like he has to know that it's okay to feel sad and to interact and to have these feelings and have these discussions and these real discussions with guys. It doesn't have to be talking about sports or working on cars, although we do that a lot. It's okay to have these. So we're really trying to foster that more within the family. And I'm not the most social person in the whole world. And so for me, getting into situations has been challenging. And so Devin's fiance, her, hanging out more with, his dad and just sort of being more united front is a work. So I'm a work in progress, just like the rest of my family. And I should hang out more with dads and have more of an influence in them, which is why I'm getting way out of my comfort zone and being on wonderful shows like yours so that I can actually interact with humans and talk on a level that's more productive for all of us.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, I haven't been around a lot of dads either, and just that have similar situations. When my daughter was young, we went to Stop with the Epilepsy Foundation of Minnesota, which was just a nice place we could go and not have to tell our story for the 800th time. Just show up, like Cheers, the old show, like everybody knows your name and they're glad you came. So that was fun. But otherwise, I don't usually hang out with a lot of dads either. So yeah, for sure. What is one tip you can share to help our listeners be more inclusive today? So just something anybody can start doing today to be more inclusive.
I think the bottom line is having an open mind. Preconceived notions are harmful. What I tell people is, if you really want to find out, I think the best way is to go online and look at for a Special Olympics event, Best Buddies, something that appeals to where you are in life, and just spend an afternoon or a day getting to know people on a different level. You and I can talk about this all day long about how wonderful they are. But until you actually interact with somebody on that level, it's really hard to imagine. So what I usually tell people is just pick an event, just go and time people at the swimming event or the track meet and just say hi or go to dinner or go to you don't have to give a ton of money to fundraiser. Just go to an event and just interact with people and see what it's about. And learning that they're humans too, and they have likes and dislikes, and they'll interact with you, and I think is an important lesson. I think we're humans, and we live in a generation where we have these abilities to have these discussions remotely. But at the end of the day, actually meeting somebody at a track event or a basketball game and just cheering them on, it's transformative. People, I can't tell you how many times that somebody who's never interacted with a human in that setting before has gone to a basketball game and said, "Oh, this is like the best thing ever. I'm going to come here every week now." So baby steps. I would never ask somebody to engage in something they plan to do for years to come. I say, just pick an afternoon that you're free, that you got nothing else going on. The weather sucks. Go to a basketball game and just keep score. Whatever. Just have that interaction to change your perspective, and then you can decide. Once you have that interaction, then you have data. Until you have the interaction, you don't have data. You're just making guesses.
Yeah, for sure. Love that. If there's one thing you hope listeners take away from your story, what would it be?
Oh, um, family matters. It starts with you and setting the example. Your actions matter. Your interactions matter. None of us is perfect, but you have to own who you are. And growth is a lifetime process. You know, we don't start out perfect. We don't end perfect, but every day we have to look at ourselves in a way that's productive. Positive self-talk. If there's one thing I've learned from Devin, it's that positive self-talk. I'm a terrible person on myself, and she has little stickers all over her room with inspirational things for her. And that's what I try to do. I try to be a little better every day. I try to own my behavior and own what I can do for my family.
Love that. Where's the best place for everybody to connect with you?
Honestly, I'm the worst marketer in the whole face of the world. So if I can't give myself a hard time, I get. Honestly, our website raseexpeditions.com. There's a lot of resources for the ARC. Every community has an ARC. Best Buddies, Special Olympics, those resources for families to interact. Of course, my books are there too, but my books are a message more so than you know a, a fundraising effort. And so that's probably the best way to get all this. And you can email us directly through the website too. I'm happy to answer questions. I've got a brilliant daughter and a wonderful wife and some kids who try very hard to keep me out of trouble, not always successfully.
Thank you so much. Ready for the last question?
Please.
Do you like spam lunch meat? Yes or no?
Well, who doesn't like spam?
Some people don't.
Yeah, I think, well, you can be in denial. You can be a vegan, but it's one of that there's certain things in life that are hard to hate. And I think spam. We spent too much time in, being in Seattle. It's easier to go to Hawaii, and if you don't like spam, it's hard to go to Hawaii. My favorite spam is the wasubi. In Hawaii they have because some of the physician's assistants I work with are Hawaiian, and that's always the snack du jour. So I've definitely been ingratiated into that culture because it's really yummy.
I've never had it that way, but yeah, the reason I ask is I live near Austin, Minnesota, where they make spam and where the spam museum's located. So it's been fun
Oh,
to ask everybody.
so I answered correctly.
Yeah. I mean, you can answer however you want to, but yeah. But yeah, it's interesting because, yeah, the Hawaiian thing isn't crazy because my partner, she went to Hawaii like 3 years ago and she sent me a picture of a pallet of spam in Walmart. And like, we live in the town they make it. We don't even have we don't have pallets of spam in the Walmart. So it's kind of funny.
Well, it's a huge thing, and full disclosure, it wasn't something I grew up with, but since we've been to Hawaii a few times, having the wasubi spam, it's really fun.
Yeah, I need to try that because usually it's just like sliced up, fry it, and then have it with pancakes or something is usually how we eat it. But I need to branch out and try different ways, I guess.
It somehow makes you feel a little healthier. So you have it on a little rice, a little seaweed, and it's like I
There you
got
go.
my greens, I got a little carbohydrate. I'm feeling better about myself already.
There you go. Well, thanks so much for being on the show.
Thank you very much. Wonderful time.
To those listening, thank you for allowing me to be part of your journey. It is truly an honor. Please join the podcast newsletter by clicking on the link in the episode description to keep up with the latest episodes. Together, we can make the world more inclusive. Until next time, stay empowered and be a champion for inclusion.